Volunteers, shoulder, arms.
208 years ago, you had the Battle of New Orleans, which was the last major military engagement in the War of 1812. It was such a big event at the time, even though the peace treaty had already been signed, that such a lopsided defeat of the British Army, this is the same British Army that had driven Napoleon out of power, by Americans, it was considered a national holiday in America, only second to the 4th of July. What we're going to have here is a reenactment of part of the Battle of New Orleans, which was a British attack on the Jackson Line, and you'll see British reenactors attempt to storm the rampart unsuccessfully. It was a probing attack that the British came very close to actually turning the flank, but they didn't pursue it, and that's what part saved New Orleans, because that could have decided the battle right there. We will have artillery demonstrations. We will have soldiers engaged in skirmishes with each other in period uniform. So this is going to be a great living history event and a unique one for Louisiana.
I'm Paul Bergeron, and today I'm representing the British Royal Artillery. This unit is supporting Pakenham's invasion of New Orleans, Louisiana, the United States, upon the orders of the Crown. In this reenactment, you'll see the British infantry advance upon the line Jackson, the breastworks behind us. You'll also see these cannons fire in support of that infantry advancing. On the other side will be the Plauchet's battalion, Jean Lafitte's pirates. You'll also see maybe the U.S. 7th, the cotton balers, and other militia that will be defending against the invaders. The cannons operate with a 6-man crew. You'll need a person who will search with the worm to make sure that the barrel is clean. You'll need or clear, and then you'll need someone to take a sponge and clean it and put out the embers. There'll be a powder pusher who will advance a charge, and it will be inserted in the cannon, and then there'll be the person that cleaned the cannon will ram that charge down to the back. There's 2 personnel assigned in the back that do what's called prick and prime. One is going to open up the charge at the vent hole and insert a primer, and then the other is going to light the primer with a lint stock, and they can get a round off, 3 rounds off maybe in a minute if they're well practiced. And they were providing artillery barrages. Outside they also had Congreve rockets that they were shooting, and those are mentioned in the Star Spangled Banner song that's part of the national anthem now. And so this artillery was there in support of the waves of infantry troops that were trying to take that breastworks that were held by General Jackson and the rest of the American forces. Depending on the kind of shot that the cannons fire, they may have an explosive round that would take out different targets. There was also canister that would kill a row of advancing opponent troops, and also what's called grape shot. These were large balls that were in a bag that were wrapped in canvas, and those would also be loaded into the barrel, shot out at advancing troops that were trying to capture the piece. And if capture was imminent, then the person that did the pick and prime had a nail and a hammer. He would drive that nail into the vent hole and then tear off the top of the nail, so then the cannon couldn't be used by the enemy troops.
The American Group Artillery Unit, the men on the left of me represents the Carolina crew, and the rest of these guys here represents, including me, John Lafitte's Libertarians. But they supplied the cannons, they supplied the skills, they supplied gunpowder, flints. They pretty much gave the American line, for Jackson Line, the best artillerymen facing the British Army. Is supposed to be the best in the world. And a lot of the Libertarian crew are used to firing cannons off of ships, where you get pitch and roll off the ships. This is on dry land, so you can get a better accuracy with the cannons, which almost decimated their front lines.
I grew up in Araby, St. Bernard Parish, and I've been doing the anniversary here at the Battle of New Orleans. This is my 34th year, and I represent a sailor from the USS Carolina, and be doing the artillery.
1812, the U.S. Was not recognized as a sovereign nation by the world. After 1812, War of 1812, they were.
The Battle of New Orleans was one of the most important military engagements in American history. It was a lopsided American victory against the same British Army that essentially defeated Napoleon in Europe. And it created an enthusiasm and nationalism in America afterwards that completely changed the political dynamics of the country. So that retained the Louisiana Purchase territory, New Orleans, which is a critical port for American agriculture exports in the U.S. It was an understated, it was a military victory with far greater consequences than most people appreciate. It's up there with the Battle of Gettysburg, the Battle of Saratoga. Had America lost the Battle of New Orleans, you would have had some changes. First, while the Treaty of Ghent, which ended the War of 1812, was signed on Christmas Eve, 1814, the treaty had not been ratified by either Parliament nor the United States Congress. The British knew that at the time that they sent the invasion fleet towards New Orleans, that there was negotiations to end the war, but they insisted on the Army, no matter what they heard about the negotiations, to continue to capture New Orleans. This would have been a huge morale blow to the young America. Bear in mind, we had only declared independence in 1776, and we'd only secured it at the Treaty of Paris in 1783 after the Battle of Yorktown. So we were still a very young country, only a few decades old. This would have shattered our confidence as a nation and led to people questioning our viability as a country, and there's a chance that America may not have survived. It's important that all people learn the history because of the full consequence of what happened after the battle due to the American victory and what happened during the battle. The most diverse fighting force to ever serve in the United States flag took place on the plains of Chalmette in the Battle of New Orleans. You had Choctaw warriors, free men of color. You had French and Spanish subjects that were born in Europe, but they came to America and they fought under the American flag. You had privateers. You had volunteers from the western states of Tennessee. You had volunteers from Kentucky and Mississippi. So this was a battle unlike any other in American history. And to understand exactly what it took for all of these diverse groups to come together to repel a very powerful army is something that a lot of people don't fully appreciate.
We're striving for authenticity, so if you look at our uniform, we have the blue jacket of artillery. Infantry is going to be wearing red, and they have a black cockade. We're firing just blanks out here. We're practicing safety, of course, and we have hearing protection because we're firing a lot of rounds. And we also elevate when we're firing, so nobody's going to get hurt. But it's really a tribute to a lot of drilling and practice to show these precision marches across the field. It's important to learn this history because this battle had an impact on world history. Think about this. What if Pakenham had succeeded in capturing New Orleans? He would also have controlled the whole lower Mississippi River Valley, and Britain would have had to send thousands of troops that had to occupy the valley, and those thousands of troops would not have been available to Wellington 6 months later at Waterloo. And think about it, we might all be speaking better French then.
The War of 1812 and plus the Battle of New Orleans is not very much known, and what divides the country today is the same issues that divided the country back then. You don't learn this in history books. In the War of 1812, this battle is only regulated to a few lines, maybe one line, one sentence. And for the War of 1812, you barely get a paragraph, for the history books. And for us, a lot of the guys here, they delved and looked at the history books, read the books, read more books in order to understand what's going on here.
It's one thing to read about history in a book. It's another thing to see it reenacted in person. And a lot of these reenactors go through so much care in procuring their uniform, their weapons, and the way they do the reenactment. it generates a greater history than just teaching it out of a book. And they get to appreciate what camp life was 200 years ago. They get to appreciate what society and culture is like. In addition to the battle reenactment, they do period dance instructions to show people how they dressed back then, how they cooked back then, how they lived, how they socialized. So it's not just a battle reenactment. It reflects exactly what the world was in New Orleans 200 years ago.
Blacksmiths were very important in the war effort because we made all the weapons and all the tools to rebuild afterwards. Blacksmiths made everything from the knives and forks you cooked with to the weapons of war, the guns and swords and knives. We made the nails, which were very important to make to rebuild. And the techniques I use are very similar to what they used back then. I just use modern fuel source of propane. Each side definitely had their own blacksmith, and they would have been behind the lines on back with the camp, in the encampments. A lot of people say it's a dying art, but it's actually in the middle of a resurgence. It's important to me because you get to make stuff, and at the end of the day, you can see what you've made. And it's real rewarding to do that. And then, especially when you have a little kid come along and go into the group or the club or your own shop and make a little something for their mom. It's really fun to see them light up with the joy.
We're teaching them more, like the people more about what happened outside of the battle. So it's not just about the guns and the cannons, it's about what happened on the sidelines. We are teaching about the molasses because it had something to do with the sugar. They burned sugar to make it into this bottle of molasses, which they then used to make sugar molds. And these would be used to sweeten your food, like with butter when you cut it.
So here we are teaching the kids how the women used to make rugs and clothes for the soldiers back in the 1800s. This is important because without the women making the clothes, the soldiers would be cold and they wouldn't have any clothes and things like that. They love it. Actually, they love to. We let them. We demonstrate to them how to do it, and we let them come on and help us make the rug. They love it.
We saw a reenactment of the Battle of New Orleans, and I learned about how they made blankets and molasses and a bunch of other things and blacksmiths.
Why is this important?
It's important because we get to learn about the history of the New Orleans and the battles and stuff. Yeah.
I learned the blacksmith can make many things out of any type of metal. I've also learned how they made clothes back in the early days, and I saw and learned how they shot cannons.
Why is history important?
So you know what goes on, and like history is what makes things in the future today.
I learned about the games and molasses, and I also learned how they make like their clothes and carpets and blankets.
Why is this history important?
History is important so one, it doesn't repeat itself, and so that we can learn what they used to do and how they used to battle each other and like how they survived.
I learned about the Battle of New Orleans.
What'd you learn about it?
I learned about the things the woman did and how it was important to history.
Why is history important?
History is important so you don't repeat it and that we can learn about what used to happen in the past.
I learned how the soldiers were living, what they did during the battles, and how overall they were treated.
Why is history important?
It shows what our ancestors did to bring us freedom and to fight for us.
What do you think when you think about how important this battle was in this very area 200 some years ago?
I feel how special it is to be on a battlefield that my ancestors fought on.
I learned how they made their resources like their blankets, how they made their games and stuff like that.
Why is this history important?
Because so it wouldn't repeat, so we wouldn't have to go through what we went through again.
I have seen here today of how the British and the American fought and how everyone teamed up to defeat the British.
Why is this an important battle?
It is an important of the American history of how the Americans were able to defeat the British.
Why is history important?
History is important because you can learn about your past and past relatives and the amazing battles the American fought.
I learned about like what they traded and certain supplies that they had.
Why is this important history?
History is important so that people can be educated on how we came to be and what took place on the grounds that we're standing on right now.
I've learned that they make molasses and that they use the tugs to support the cannons, but then they shot the tugs and they broke and molasses burnt all over the floors.
Why is this history important?
It's important because you can get your tradition of today and how important the battle was, that we got all this land.
I am an 8th grade teacher at St. Bernard Middle, and we brought the students out here today just to kind of put a visual with what they're learning about in history.
What's the difference between learning in the field and learning from a book?
I think that in a book, you're reading it and you're just getting an idea in your head, but when you actually see it, a reenactment of it, it puts things into perspective and makes you appreciate a lot more where we have come from.
What kind of reactions do you have from your students?
I was surprised just how intrigued they were by this. They were real interested in the blacksmith especially, so great job. But also I think it just shocked them to see like there was a kid out here showing them different things that happened during the war and how they stayed entertained or how they made clothes and food. So I think they were just surprised at just how minimal things were back then, really put it in perspective for them.
It's important that we know where we come from because I think it was coined, if we don't pay attention to our history, we're damned to repeat it. So by understanding what took place on this field, and to me personally, it's the first time in America where we actually decided to come together as a nation, as many cultural diversities, and for the first time united as one people with a common cause for freedom.
Parents, every opportunity you see to observe living history, bring your children out and talk to the living historians. They learn as much history orally as they do in the books, and there's just no replacement for the smells, the sounds, and the sights that you see at a reenactment.
How can people get more information?
They could visit the St. Bernard Parish Facebook site. They could visit Parish Government's website, sbpg.net, or you can go to the Friends of the Battle of New Orleans Facebook page.